Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, friends. Welcome to today's webinar, where we will be exploring the topic addictions and mental health. My name is Tolu, and I'm your host and an assistant secretary of Voice of Men 360. I'm also a registered social worker, and it is my great pleasure to host this webinar today. Thank you, Voice of Men 360 and the team, for giving me this opportunity. We hold these weekly webinars to create awareness on topics such as this, with the hopes of sharing valuable information with our community, as we believe it'll be useful in some ways. Before I introduce our special guest today, I want to give you a brief introduction about Voice of Men 360, which is a nonprofit organization founded in 2020 and is based in Toronto, Canada. Voice of Men 360's organization was born out of seeing the tremendous need of boys and men in society. So Voice of Men stepped up to support and help them in many areas of their lives. We are part of International Men's Day, which is a global organization. International Men's Day is based on 6 pillars, which has to do with the overall well-being of boys and men. It has been around for over 21 years and is celebrated in nearly 90 countries. These countries join together to do various activities on a regular basis. Before I bring our guest today, I would like to read our disclaimer. Okay, so please be advised that content brought forward for any event facilitated by Voice of Men 360 is always brought forward in good faith. However, we may bring forth dialogue and opinions that are not representative of this organization. The facts and information are believed to be accurate at the time they are offered. All facilitators, guest speakers, panel members, and audience participants are responsible for using their own good judgment in taking any actions that may relate to the discussions. The content brought forward may include discussions for some where they may be emotionally at risk. It is important to know that this organization is engaging in discussion forums only to offer and inspire awareness and connection. It is not providing therapeutic advice. If you need crisis intervention or therapy, please engage the services of a mental health professional in your local area. If you have any questions about this disclaimer or the webinar that you may freely contact Voice of Men 360 organization through the website or any of our social media platforms. With this now said, going forward, should you choose to voluntarily participate in this event in any capacity, we welcome you. Should you decide that this event is not for you at this time, we respect that choice and we welcome you to join us later. Thank you. So, as I mentioned earlier, our topic for today's webinar is addictions and mental health. And we have a special guest, Dean Anderson. So Dean is a passionate Canadian certified addiction counselor from London, Ontario. He currently wears many hats in the addiction and recovery communities, including being a private practice counselor, MAP service provider, consultant, and NRT practitioner. His experience includes withdrawal management, residential treatment, peer support, private care, and several volunteering ventures. His dedication to the field is reflected in the multiple committees, programs, and community events he attends and participates in. In addition, Dean uses his lived experience to be an advocate for addiction recovery and the removal of stigma through public speaking, media appearances, and educational workshops. Let us welcome Dean today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Hi, Dean. How are you doing?
I'm wonderful on this sunny Saturday afternoon or morning.
Yes. Oh, it's sunny where you are in London?
It is right now. I've got a break. It was raining this morning, but now I've got sunshine.
Okay, I think we're about to catch the rain because it's a bit gray here. But thank you for joining us this morning. It seems like you are quite knowledgeable in the area of mental health and addictions, and I'm looking forward to you teaching us today what you know, your personal lived experiences. So thank you very much once again for joining us.
My pleasure.
So I understand that you are Canadian certified addiction counselor. Yep. But what led you to this journey? And I know you were on our Open Up show not too long ago, so maybe some people have heard a bit of your journey, but for the people that maybe have not had a chance to watch that, if you could kind of tell us a bit more about what led you to this journey of becoming a Canadian certified addiction counselor, that would be great.
Sure, I can give you the cliff notes really fast.
And, yeah, sure.
And that is my own lived experience, many years of struggling with substance use and addiction. In that process of my own journey and through multiple years of sobriety and trying to work on my own mental health, I found that there were lots of pitfalls, lots of gaps, and things that made it more difficult to find care And not that there's not a lot of wonderful people. I mean, in that process, I actually met, dozens of fantastic helpers and beautiful people that I still, contact with today. But I also saw a lot of times when I was met with barriers that actually contributed to my substance use. It didn't really help much. So then when I found myself in treatment for myself in residential care, things started to change because I recognized that society's idea of society's general idea, not everyone's, but the general idea in society is that you only need to take the biological piece out of the addiction. So that means just stop drinking and stop using drugs and you'll be fine.
Right.
But I practiced that for many years and it didn't work because I still struggled with mental health. There's actually a psychological, a social, a spiritual, all these other components to it. And it wasn't until I was in residential treatment that I was able to recognize that and see that. So then I went, wow, there's something bigger here. There's work to be done, things to do. So in the process of my going through, I submerged myself in the recovery process and went to anything and everything I could find about recovery in my local area, treatment centers, post-care, counselors, hospital programs, anything I could do. In doing that, I found that I also had a knack for helping other people. And it was brought to my attention, so some of my peers and other people, that I should probably go back to school and make a lifestyle change. And that also prompted me to be able to look at how we could do things differently or how I could interact differently, or be a voice, like doing things like this and trying to let people know that it's normal and there's something on the other side of it.
Okay.
And that's what led me here.
Wow. Okay. So let me make sure I understood correctly. So you did struggle with your own mental health and addictions issues.
I
You
did.
did actually all these things that we said that you work in or you volunteered in or you've been part of. It's almost like you've actually lived this yourself. Like you've been in residential treatment. You've received, it sounds like probably like some peer support, some counseling, and you realize along the way, because you were it sounded like you were very involved in your own and very motivated to recover. You realize along the way that it's a holistic component. It's spiritual, it's physical, it's mental, biological. Am I missing something? But emotional. So it sounded like you discovered that no, it's not just to tell someone to stop drinking, but there's a lot more to this. And then you ended up maybe helping people as you made that discovery, and to the point where people are like, you're really good at this. You need to pursue this educationally, correct?
That's the good Cole's notes. You nailed it.
Awesome.
I went through 6 years of sobriety
Okay.
a long time ago, and in that 6 years of sobriety, I just practiced what society thought I thought what society wanted me to do, which was to just be abstinent and just go work and make money and do your thing and not work on other areas of your life. And I was a lot of times miserable and discontent and struggling with depression and anxiety. And then when I went relapsed and then went back into treatment, I realized that that whole time when I was having anxiety and depression in my 6 years of sobriety, it was just untreated substance use disorder. Right? It wasn't that there was something wrong with me. I wasn't doing the work that I was supposed to be doing. In some circles, they call that being a dry drunk. So it's somebody that's just not practicing, or the substance is a coping mechanism. It's a tool that you use to deal with life. And then you take away that tool that you use to deal with life. And if you don't replace that with another tool, then you get mental health and addictions, and people become suicidal, or they fall into other secondary addictions. So then they go to gambling or pornography or a secondary substance. Make sense?
No, and that does make a whole lot of sense, and I'm really looking forward to you explaining a bit more about that. You're basically saying that you really do need to treat the root of this and understand it, and so that you can be whole and actually enjoy your life, right? Because oftentimes people turn to things that make like substances, or even like you mentioned, porn, even food, because they're trying to. It sounds like they're trying to, and I mean I know this because I do practice in this field as well. It does sound like they're trying to fulfill something, right? Oftentimes maybe there's some trauma or something there, and they're trying to just like mask all that and not dealing with the actual emotion.
Right. That's exactly what it is. some of my peers call it maladaptive coping. I mean, that's
Mhm.
the underlying tone to it, whether that was, brought along by trauma or uh, parental things that happened when they were young, or nurture or nature, whatever that is that brought that. There's still an inability to cope and deal with everyday life, and if you're not figuring out a way to do that, you're going to find a way.
Mhm.
And we're in a society right now that um, shows us a million ways to cope except healthy ways. It's like, oh, here's a Facebook, or here's a cell phone, or here's a video game, or here's a
Mhm.
Big Mac, right? I mean, they want us to consume, and that's what they're going to show us, and that's what people are learning how to do. And
Mhm.
sometimes that turns into not just sugar and fast food; it turns into harder drugs and things that can be even more dangerous.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. So, can you tell me, as we're getting into this, what is addictions?
So there's a when we're talking about substance use disorder,
Mhm. Mhm.
there's an actual some key areas within the DSM. So that's a diagnostic manual for statistical manual for mental health,
Mhm.
and those key areas consist of certain things. There's like criteria. So
Mhm.
the fastest and easiest one that I like to use with people is it's when you continue to do something even though it's causing detriment to other parts of your life,
Mhm.
right? So if
Mhm.
I'm still eating something and doing something and it's making me sick and it's giving me diabetes or whatever, then that's, kind of the root one. We're also looking at increased tolerance to whatever the drug may be. So if you used to drink 2 beers and that doesn't do it, now you have to drink five. There's a component of withdrawal, so that I have negative symptoms on my body when I don't use it, and that could be for sugar. We've all done it where we skipped our morning coffee and you have a headache. Withdrawal, right? Um,
Mhm.
there's usually increased usage, so then as you continue to use, you use more, and
Mhm.
then that's when that starts to replace your other coping mechanisms, and it starts to flip the script. It also includes attempts at quitting. So in one of the screening questions that we ask when we bring people in, is one of the first things you say is, have you tried to quit before?
Mhm.
People think that relapse is part of addiction, and realize and the people argue over that fact, and because they say, well, if relapse is part of addiction, that means I have to relapse to
Mhm.
right, and I don't want to do that. So there's a misnomer there. It's basically saying, though, if I don't relapse, then how do I even know if I have an addiction? If I don't try to stop, how do I know if it's a problem? Does that make sense?
Mhm. Mhm.
So we
Mhm.
can't know it's a problem until you. So part of the diagnosis of addiction is repeated attempts at trying to stop.
Mhm. Mhm.
There's an increased time and amount spent.
Mhm.
So you would spend more time, and in retrospect to that, that means I'm spending more time pursuing my addiction. I'm spending less time on things that I enjoy. So my hobbies start to go, my family time starts to depreciate. I start taking things away from work. I stop working overtime because I got to get out early and get to my drug of choice.
Mhm.
Those are the, in a nutshell, what we're looking at when we're talking about how to kind of diagnose whether somebody has a substance use disorder or an addiction. If you're recognizing that you have, most of those in place, if not all of them, then you should probably talk to a professional or look at having further conversations with somebody.
Okay, so you pointed out quite a few different things for one to
Right.
recognize if someone is battling with addictions to something.
Yeah.
So I'm going to try to see if I can recap. You mentioned that it starts to kind of replace other coping mechanisms.
Yeah.
You try to quit. You become more. You use it more and more and more.
Yeah.
Um, sorry, I know I'm missing quite a bit, but I just want to make sure that people really kind of catch that. So that way they can look up for signs of that, whether it's in
Right.
their lives or in their loved ones' lives. So can you just maybe like give it to us
I
just one more time? Yes, please.
Sure. I blasted you with a lot there.
Yes.
I don't
And I was trying
blame
to
you.
catch it all like, oh
Okay.
shoot, I wish I was taking notes, but yes.
Okay. So there are questionnaires. I just encourage
Mhm.
somebody to just Google substance use questionnaires, and you can answer a questionnaire online, and it will tell you whether or not you should look at that. But here it is in a quick. There's
Thank
seven.
you.
There's seven of them. One is
Okay.
increased tolerance.
Mm-hmm.
One is I'm showing signs of withdrawal.
Mm-hmm.
Increased usage, or
Mm-hmm.
right. Uh, Trying to quit but unable to quit. increased time spent searching or the activities. So if I find them spending a lot of time going to the beer store or a lot of times planning my next drink or my next thing, figuring out what I'm going to do. Me personally, I used to leave and go to work. And I have to leave, a certain amount of time early to make sure I could get the liquor store before I got to work because it would be closed by the time I was done. So I spent a lot of time doing those things. Reduced hobbies and reduced passions. So if I had passions and things that I love to do and interests that I'm not pursuing anymore, that's a big sign. And then lastly is continuing to use regardless of the consequences of my use. So I
Thank
continue
you.
to use even though it's costing me financially, mentally, emotionally, relationships, whatever it may be, but I still keep doing it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I
Well,
mean, when I work with people in my practice, oftentimes I get people with substance abuse issues or substance use issues, sorry. And so I do like it's interesting because I've heard about the trying to plan their day around this, trying to,
mm,
yes, but they don't the consequences financially, I can't really afford it, but I'm still doing it. So
mm,
yes, you're totally right. I'm not quite sure why those ones didn't stick to my mind when you first said it, but thank you for reiterating that for us.
mm,
So tell me more. How does one find themselves developing an addiction to whether it's substances or gambling or porn
mm,
or something or even food? So yeah,
mm.
in your years of learning and even from just admitting that you have battled with substance use issues, can you tell
mm.
us more about that?
So there's a whole bunch of entry levels to it.
Mm-hmm.
And normally it's just, for most people, it's some sort of leisure, and we
Mm-hmm.
live in a society that says, hey, do this, it's fun, right? You'll enjoy it. You can be social, you can feel connected, you will have people around you that are doing the same thing, and there's some peer pressure and, a bunch of those things. So the substance use itself um, is normally that. Or it's learned behavior. So you're seeing other people use it, family members or whatever. It's a normal behavior to get drunk on the weekends, and mom and dad do it, and I'm going to do it as I get older. The actual addiction piece comes with the idea, and the way I like to explain is it's a tool, right? And when your body starts to recognize that when I use this tool, it does a job and it suits a need. So it gets my needs met. So my needs might be, for some people, it might make me a better dancer, might make me more handsome, might make me more articulate. Certain types of drugs can create focus, right? So if I have ADHD or ADD, it can create focus and help me concentrate. So most of the time people are medicating themselves and they're just not aware that they're medicating themselves. So they're taking this drug, it's helping them achieve some goal or fulfill some need. And then as time goes on, their natural abilities to try and fulfill that need become weaker. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like using a crutch when you don't have a bad leg, right? And then you start walking around on that crutch, you're going to atrophy. Your leg is going to get weaker. You're going to not be able to use it. And then when you take the crutch off, you're going to be like, oh, I'm walking funny. I don't know why. This is the same thing. So with substance use, the continued exposure, the amount of people you hang out with, the places that you go, the things that you do, in addition to some sort of trauma or inability to cope, is a perfect storm. And that's why I said, earlier about the biological, psychological, social, spiritual, all these different aspects of it. Because when that perfect storm comes into play, where you are finding that your substance use is helping you physically, it's helping you mentally and emotionally, and it's helping you socially. And it's the opposite of spirituality. It actually hinders your spirituality. But when it's affecting all of those areas, and then you fall into this perfect storm of what is addiction, which is a dependency, psychological, mental, emotional dependency on a substance outside of your own self.
Wow, thank you. And that was so beautifully explained. I loved how you started with like, yeah, socially, or your exposure to it, seeing maybe your mom, your dad doing it, a tool for your body. So something like maybe like drugs, like ADHD drugs or something to help you focus. And then
Yeah.
it's like naturally then you start to lose your natural ability to actually be able to focus. And like you mentioned, a perfect storm because it's fulfilling all those needs, like it's pseudo fulfilling all those needs, the psychological, biological, emotional, spiritual, and all those things. But actually you
Mhm.
said it hinders the spiritual. So thank you for, I really hope our audience is learning from this because even me, like I said, I do work with people with substance use issues. There's still a lot that I don't know, so I'm learning from listening to you today.
Mhm.
Thank you for this.
My pleasure.
Yeah, so let me ask you another question. So how does addictions affect the individual, families, and society?
So we only have an hour, right?
Yeah.
That's a very broad question.
Hmm.
But we go back to that same thing I just talked about, the
Hmm.
biological, psychological, social, for the individual. So it can impact them in so many different ways. Like when we're looking at those diagnoses, those 7 things I listed,
Hmm.
right? When you're living that life and you have increased desire, increased searching, decreased desire to do things that you used to love, you can
Hmm.
only imagine how that would impact the relationships in your life.
Hmm.
And once you start impacting the relationships in your life and you're spending more time on your substance use, then there's a storm that kind of washes across someone's life where people are less tolerant with them, where they're not feeling loved and connected, they're not feeling um, like they belong. And when a human being feels that way, it usually creates a greater barrier between them and the people they love. And then that there's a cycle of shame that happens. So I have an addiction. The addiction slow progression comes into play where I get to a point where, like we talked about, where I'm struggling with that ability to walk because I've been using that crutch. Then I feel shameful about that. I'm like, I shouldn't have to keep using drugs and alcohol. And there's something that, I think there's something wrong with me inherently. Why do I have to be like this? Why am I spending my money? I'm not normal. I'm different. I don't like the way I feel. And then they feel shameful from that. And then in addition to the relationships deteriorating, the people around them are saying, what's wrong with you? Why do you got to be like that?
Hmm.
Why are you being dishonest? Why are you sneaking around? Aren't you doing the things that you love? And why aren't you spending time with me? And inherently they feel this shame about their use. So when we're talking about coping, we're talking about the inability to deal with emotions that you
Hmm.
don't like. And guess what the lowest of all human emotions is? It's shame. So you're getting shame from your substance use, and then that feeds the addiction to go back in to have to use more to deal with the shame of using in the first place. And there's this nasty cycle that goes along with that. When somebody falls into that cycle of shame or that cycle of use, and they start, pedaling through that, they start separating themselves at work, with family, with friends, with finances, and then basically the entire system of what somebody's life is. So biologically, psychologically, spiritually, socially, that's the building blocks of the model of health, the perfect model of health that we use in the medical model. So when you see how it's attacking every single one of those areas, you can see how an individual's life would literally deteriorate. And that's where we see people living in a way that most people would look at and say, how could somebody live like that? When you see them living on the street, or you see them panhandling, or in the hospital, or being arrested by police, is because these things have just deteriorated over time, and to no fault of their own, because the idea of trying to get help is terrifying, because you're stuck in this cycle and you can't break out of it. I don't know how to cope and live with my life, because the pain that I would have of trying to get better is 10 times worse than me just going to find my next fix. It's excruciating. So you have a fear of emotions,
Hmm.
and the way to get out of your fear of emotions is to go and face all these emotions you hate. So it's this trap, if that makes sense. So
Hmm.
that's the biggest way in how it impacts the individual.
Hmm.
Now the family, that is a whole nother story, and that's where it's control and people trying to fix problems and trying to help the person, but feeling helpless, being unable to, or they're blaming themselves, or the person within their addiction, because of the drug seeking behavior, has caused instability or emotional instability, uh, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde kind of mentality. They don't know how to deal with it. There's not as many resources out there in the world as we would like to think, for these people to find what it is that they need. And then people aren't trained on how to deal with it. They don't know how to deal with somebody in addiction, because of the shame, the stigma, and the anonymity that is put on addiction. We don't talk about it. We don't have open conversations. So people are like, I don't know how to deal with this thing. The only thing they know is from what they've seen on television shows, right? Watching intervention, like, oh, we just need an intervention, just need to tell this person that we're sad and they're going to change, and that's just it's not that simple. So the families are impacted, and then we're also looking at intergenerationally, right? So like children see their parents drink and then they're more likely to drink, and that's passed down. Coping mechanisms, life skills, communication, they're passed down generation to generation, not including intergenerational trauma and things that happen. There's people that go through trauma, they don't have any substance use issues, but they pass their trauma down to their children, and then their children have substance use issues because of the passed down trauma. So the family unit is huge, but then it's also kind of the key to connection and belonging and people finding what they need to heal too. So it's really a very delicate, um, I don't know how to explain, a very delicate ecosystem, we'll call it.
Yeah. So what about society? Because we can see the impact on the individual, the family. Obviously, they're all part of the ecosystem, and then the larger society. So can you tell us a little bit about that too?
Sure, I can. Society is addicted to addiction.
Can tell us more, because that sounds like a controversial statements. I want to hear more. What do you mean by that?
Well, so like I alluded to earlier, in Western culture, our society is built on it. Our society is built on consumerism, right? McDonald's wants you addicted on McDonald's. Coca-Cola wants you addicted to Coca-Cola. I mean, they would never admit it. Nobody would say it. But I mean, their job is to put it in your face and have an advertisement and tell you that you're going to feel good when you get this, right? You'll be happy when. All of the advertisements out there are people that are joyous, happy, and free based on consumption, based on outside influences. You'll be happy based on your interaction with social media. You'll be happy with how many likes you get. You'll be happy with this, that, and the other thing. So our society is continuously becoming more and more external. We don't look internally. We become more worldly, in that I'll be happy when I get possessions, when I get things, and when those things happen. But the things that we work on when we're trying to help people with addiction is trying to find that inside. How can I be self-fulfilled? How can I be happy on the inside? How can I cope with my emotions? Even if I don't get the fancy car, how am I going to be okay, right? So in that society-wise, that's kind of an outlier of our culture as a whole. But if we look at it from a social worker, how many people are employed in regards to substance use it's huge. So right now, statistics from 2016, don't quote me, but around that time, 2016, stats came through, and the average taxpayer, so per capita taxpayer, pays about, in Ontario, $1,074 a year on substance use and the impacts of substance use. So that's the medical, the city services, all that stuff. So if you look at that number, in the city of London alone, we have 511,000 people, right? So 511,000 people times $1,000, that's a lot of money. Right?
You didn't expect me to do the math, did you?
the math is $50 million or
okay.
Something.
Wow, that's a lot. Right? Yeah.
Right, but that's just 1 year in the city of London, right?
Yeah.
So if you look at that, then you go, okay, well, then we're saying that there's 10% of society that are in active addiction right now. That's they're estimated. I think it's much higher because people don't register that. And then of that 10%, only 10% of that 10% are actually struggling and out there, using city services and whatever. So when you look at the cost, it's huge. It's massive. I'm not. It's very important that I caveat this and say, hey, you know what? I don't want you then going and getting mad at the people that are in addiction because of the cost. That's why we don't talk about this much, because if people go around, you're costing me money, right?
Right.
Here's what I want you to understand is that they're actually keeping the economy going. The City of London, the largest employer in the City of London is the London Health Sciences Centre, which is the hospital system.
Hmm.
56% of the intakes in the hospital system are from substance use. So guess what? Half of those people have jobs because of the substance use.
Hmm.
So that's half the taxes that are paid are coming from the substance use. The infrastructure, the second biggest employer is the City of London itself, the police, the ambulance, the fire. Their
Hmm.
number one calls for most of those are substance use related.
Hmm.
So what I'm trying to say uh, is the society, my job, your job as a social worker, the
Mhm.
job of the guy working at the subway next to the hospital is has a huge impact on the actual idea of addiction and the whole process. So
Hmm.
society itself, if we just tomorrow snapped our fingers and addiction was gone, we would go into an economic crisis. We
Mhm.
would, the society as we know it would, we'd go into a Great Depression and we wouldn't know what to do with ourselves.
Hmm.
So when I say we're addicted to addiction, because that's why, right? And then we continue to make it more accessible, alcohol more accessible, drugs more accessible, and then we also have the criminal element where society then penalizes people for using it. Like we said, something that you started doing that you didn't think was a big deal turned into something bigger when you found out that you couldn't cope, and then before you know it, you're stuck in this addiction. Nobody ever wakes up and says, you know what, I think I'm going to be a drug addict today,
Mm.
right? It just doesn't
Mhm.
happen. It's a
Mhm.
progression and it happens over time. But then people get to that point and then they're penalized, they're shamed, they're stigmatized, they're arrested, they're charged, they're done these things, which perpetuates that stigma. So then society doesn't want it to get better. Not
Right.
that there's some, I'm gonna put on my tinfoil hat and say there's some person out there that's making that rule up, but that's just how society has progressed over time.
Right. 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 Yeah, it's not operating in that sense. Like as much as we keep putting out these services, there's centers for people to safely inject drugs. There's harm reduction. Like there's a lot of services, like you mentioned, that are
Well,
geared towards people with substance use issues. But at the same time, there's so much that's out there that's not really allowing people to kind of walk away from these things. And like you said, alcohol is easily accessible. Even during the pandemic, that was one of the no touch zones. Like, no, we're gonna leave, LCBO open. It's an essential service, right? And I mean, they mentioned because people do. I think they even actually used the fact that because people are, they do have alcohol use issues, and so they need it, or else it would actually cause a bigger issue with the hospital system, right?
right. Yep.
So those are I see when as you're talking, the wheels are spinning in my head, and I'm like, yep,
Mm,
yeah, totally makes
right.
sense. And I mean, and I'm gonna go a little bit off topic because I was gonna ask you. You've probably noticed there's been more opiates. I can't even talk. Deaths in the news, especially like with the pandemic. They're saying the numbers
Mhm.
are going up, and I kind of feel like it's not being as addressed as it ought to be. So, what's your take on what's going on with the opioid deaths?
My take. Um, so it's a crisis
Mm-hmm.
for sure. The opioid, I was part of a panel that talked about it a couple of weeks ago, and there was a lot of great information, a lot of people sharing, and a lot of
Mm-hmm.
emotions. But the there's a detachment there that society has because they figure that the people addicted to opioids are, deviant, or there's something wrong with them, or they're but the reality of it is they're just people, right?
Mm-hmm.
They are just people that, like I just described, they started out using something, doing something somewhere, and then that was the path that they got led on, and before you knew it, it was too late, and that's where they were, right? And that's a shame, and we are doing our best to try and alleviate that through, like you said, supervised injection sites, even safe consumption, um, and safe supply. So there's doctors actually giving out opioids to people with drug addiction to make sure that they're not getting a tainted supply, so that they can maintain their drug use. And I'm not against any of that. I think that what we're doing right now is we're reacting. We're in triage mode. We're trying to save lives and stop people from dying, because if we don't save them from dying, then they're never going to get help, right? And the one thing about addiction is somebody has to want to do it. I mean, that's, a tried and true, right? You could force somebody to do it, lock them up, and then we go through detox and go through whatever. But if they don't have some sort of desire to want to make those lasting changes that we talked about at the beginning, it's only a matter of time before they relapse and go back into that lifestyle again, because they're not dealing with the actual things that they need to work on, mental health, physical health, to be able to get better, right? So forcing people to try and change isn't the answer. It's not gonna do anything. If anything, it actually turns out to be more lethal, especially with opiates, because what happens is people stop using opioids if they got forced to, if they got thrown in jail. We see it specifically in the prisons. People get arrested, they go to jail, they get out of jail, then they try to use the drugs the way that they used to use drugs, and they overdose because their tolerance has decreased and they die. It happens all the time. So this forced abstinence can be extremely dangerous. So we have to figure out how to keep them safe and keep them alive, and that's why we're doing, naloxone and doing all those other things to intervene to keep people safe. But then we look at the COVID, and COVID exasperates everything. So on a multitude of levels. Firstly, fear, right? So here we are looking at it from a coping perspective, and then you add this global pandemic into the society of people that are already down and out and feeling horrible. Maybe some might not feel horrible. I mean, it's a choice, right? And they want to be there. But if you're living in squalor and you're feeling low on yourself, and all of a sudden there's a pandemic, it's very difficult to see hope that things are going to get better, right? So then it's a lot easier to increase how much you're going to stick in your arm or snort, and then end up dying from it. There's also the lack of services. So the services were all decreased because of COVID. So being able to access or get into certain things, there wasn't a huge decrease because the frontline people knew that there was a problem, but the interactive services, so like people just walking the streets and talking to them. There's like in London, they have London Cares, which would walk around. I think they had decreased rounds and they were more distant and they weren't connecting with people. And the connection is what helps them get better. So they had, that was a problem as well. Of course, there's the fentanyl. Increased the increased potency of fentanyl, carfentanil, and those drugs, it create a higher. I keep saying overdose, but there's a new terminology. They're not using overdose. It's I'll think of it. There's another way to describe it, because overdose sounds punitive. I'll get to it in a second.
I'm not aware of that yet, so I'm looking forward to hearing that.
It stepped out of my brain. I'm using overdose as because it's
default.
It's the default, but there's another way to say it, so I'm going to correct myself now. And then on top of this, the icing on the cake for the overdose deaths is influx of money. So the CERB became a variable where. And what was happening was a lot of people that normally wouldn't have access to that kind of money were just applying for CERB, and they were getting it. So they're getting a couple $1,000s a month when they're normally getting $600 a month. And there was an influx of cash in the substance use circles. I was working in the front line with the homeless population when COVID hit. And what they did was they started allowing people to have tents and have temporary housing, because they're telling everybody to stay home, but the homeless people don't have a home to go to. So we're saying, okay, you can put a tent up in the city square, or you can put, in London, we had them at the fair, we had them on street corners, we had them all over the place. Then you have these isolated spaces and tents where people can go in and hide and just sit and use drugs for extended amounts of time. And then people weren't checking on them, and people were just hiding in these places. So there was nobody recognizing that they were going into overdose and dying. So it created a bigger problem. So this was a perfect storm. All of these things combined, and we saw more deaths from that than COVID.
And it's like, I know like it's not always in the forefront of the news because COVID has taken up quite a bit, but I catch it when they do talk about it, and I pay attention because Like I mentioned, I've actually worked like in the hospital, in the crisis team, in the mental health units. And I had a chance to, when I was doing my bachelor's of social work placement, I went to Austria and I got a chance to work in a harm reduction like shelter. So I've
Mhm.
had quite a bit of experience in this world. So for me, when I hear these things, I'm definitely paying attention.
Mhm.
Let me ask you a question. We often hear people say that they are in recovery. You mentioned it too. You're like recovery. You talked about how in the end it wasn't what that you needed that biological, psychological, spiritual, socially component.
Mhm.
But so we often hear people say they're in recovery. But can you please tell us more about what the recovery process really looks like? Can you just go a little bit more in depth for us?
Yeah, so each individual is unique, and that's something that I really try to hit home.
Mm-hmm.
Like we talked about earlier, each person gets to where they got to based on their own life experience, based on their own traumas, based on their own upbringing, based on their own biology. So the treatment and getting into recovery is the same. It's unique as the individual. So the
Mm-hmm.
same as you got there very uniquely, you're probably going to have to get out very uniquely. So there's no one size fits all treatment, which I think society wants to have that. They want to have this cookie cutter, just stick somebody in residential care and they'll get better, or give them this or give them that, or maybe it's methadone or Suboxone or whatever it might be. Um, First is, somebody having the desire and the want to make change, and that's where we talk about rock bottom. And I'm not a big fan of the term, but in the 12 step they call it the turning point, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's where you get to a point of saying, I've had enough of this, and the pain that I'm feeling right now because of my substance use is going to be less than my pain of trying to go and make change. And as long as my pain or fear of change is greater than where I'm at right now, I'm going to stay where I'm at right now and I'm going to continue to use. And that's when there's a cognitive switch that flips, that they say, I've got to go make this change. I got to do this. Part of the problem with society is people get that switch, it flips, and then there's nothing there for them in the moment, right? So they'll be like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I'm going to go to withdrawal management. I'm going to go get some help. I'm going to go, this is, my brain switched. I'm in this mode. I got to get better. They'll go to withdrawal management. Somebody will help them. They'll get 4 or 5 days of time in withdrawal management. Then when they get out of withdrawal management, there's very little care for them after.
Mm-hmm.
There's some treatment programs, KMH, addiction services, different things like that, individual counselors like myself, but there's nothing that actually walks people through the process and actually holds their hand and says, this is what you're going to do, this is where we're going to go, right? So they'll go into withdrawal management, they'll get better, they hit that rock bottom, they hit that turning point. Then when they leave there, if they even did withdrawal management, maybe they just stayed home and decided to abstain and get to a point of clarity there. But then when that's done and they're feeling better and their family members have helped them and take care of them and got to that turning point, there's no long-term care for that biological, psychological, social, spiritual components to help keep them in that space. There's long waiting lists for residential treatment. So long waiting list for care. Somebody will get out of the initial withdrawal space, and
Mm-hmm.
then they feel hopeless. They feel disconnected. Or they think that all they have to do is just maintain the biological component. They don't even know about that other stuff, and then they won't go out and reach and find that additional help that they need. So the recovery process, if they fail, then they have to find a new bottom. Because I failed, now I've realized that the only constant or the thing that's there to help me is my drug, and the people in society are not. Then my drug is more constant and reliable than anything else. And then they'll continue down that path of using until they find another bottom where that pain outmatches the change, so that they can flip and become better, if that makes sense.
Yes, it really. Oh, sorry, no, you're still talking. Yes, but it
Yeah,
does.
no,
Yes,
go ahead.
continue, please. Mm-hmm.
Right. So that's kind of the turning point in rock bottom. Once a person gets to that flipping point and is able to make that change, that's when we've got to kind of jump on it as fast as possible and say, okay, what are we doing? How can we help? Right? And then that's where, personally within my practice, I use the biopsychosocial spiritual model of health. Even a lot of indigenous cultures use that same idea, the medicine wheel or similar things, where we're looking at building health. We're not looking at taking away the addiction. We're looking at building up your quality of life to make it so you don't need the drugs and alcohol. So we're working on learning how to cope, and we're learning on taking care of our physical body. We're learning on building our social structures and relationships. We're learning on building up our spirituality in the sense of being able to have hope and faith and a future and set goals and make sure that I have something to look forward to, right? So when we build up all of those areas, we're looking at a whole bunch of different things. That's where the fingerprint of the individual comes in, because each person's going to be different. They're going to have different biological, psychological, social, spiritual needs. And it's kind of going through those and saying, how can we build something for you? So recovery for everyone is that. It's figuring out, and the people that have the best recovery that I know of within my circles are ones that see that, achieve balance, and look at building a life of quality and a life of those things that allows them to cope well. And then coping is twofold. One is building the resiliency in your ability to cope. So something bad happens and I'm okay and I'm going to feel okay with it. And secondly is changing your environment so you don't have to cope from things. If I've got a really horrible relationship, get out of it, right? So that I don't have to deal with that anymore. So I don't have to cope, right? You can do one or the other, or you can do both. And I recommend doing both so we can minimize the stressors in our life and we can learn to deal with stressors. If I only do one or the other, then I'm not in a good space. If I build too much resiliency, then I'm just going to allow stress to hit me all the time, and then I'm going to collapse. Or if I bubble wrap myself and I just go sit and lock myself in my basement, then when something bad happens, I'm not going to have the skills to deal with it. So recovery is that. And then even within the 12-step process, they're kind of doing the same thing. They're looking at cognitively addressing fears, going through life, making connections, figuring out how to build social networks, destigmatizing, getting rid of denial and being to be okay with that. So recovery process as a whole it's that. It's life, it's living, right? And that's what makes it so convoluted and difficult for people to grasp and understand. And that's what makes it also so hard to swallow. So when somebody says, "Oh," one of my peers, he says, "You only have to change one thing, right? That's everything." Right? And the idea of that can be terrifying for people. Wait a minute, I have to change my whole life in order to get better. Can I just change one thing? And the reality of it is when we're talking about those 7 things that impacted addiction at the beginning, plus the biopsychosocial of it, it's impacted your whole life. So you're going to have to change your whole life. So it's having that guidance and having someone help you walk through that, whether it's a sponsor or a counselor, a treatment center. They help you build those skills and understand how it is to live that life. And that's recovery, right? And it's different for everybody. It could mean I'm recovered from alcohol and I'm smoking cannabis. It's not 100% abstinence, or it doesn't have to be. Some people think it is. Some people think it's not. Some people think recovery is being on methadone. Some people don't, right? But that's what you decide is your quality of life and what's going to help propel you into a future of safety and comfort and contentment and happiness and whatever that means to you.
Wow. Okay, you said so much in there. And
I'm sorry I talked.
But no. But I love, like, seriously, I'm sitting there, I'm like, I'm loving everything you're saying. And it totally just, it makes sense to me, right? Because, like I said, because of being somehow a bit in this field, but I'm going to reiterate a few things because it was a lot. And it was really, I just want people to kind of understand that recovery can look different for each person because, like you mentioned, how they got there was different. So it's not going to be a cookie cutter thing. It's going to be it needs to be tailored, and that's what society doesn't often get, right? And I remember I worked with an organization. We were very focused on the biological, psychological, and the social, biopsychosocial, but spirituality was never a component that was actually addressed. And I remember recently I was reading a research on mental health recovery and talking about spirituality is actually really important. I forgot where they did this, but they actually have a spiritual component to the recovery in the hospital. And so I know like a lot of hospitals will have like the chaplain come or the whatever with the spiritual practitioner, but this one they actually like they had a whole program that was dedicated to a spiritual component. It wasn't necessarily like a Christian or whatever, but just like you mentioned, the faith and all these things. And so it seems like this is kind of where maybe the new part of recovery from, you know, mental health issues and addictions is kind of gearing. Am I correct?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that there's a poor connection to religion and spirituality, and people connect that with, you know, Christianity or whatever it might be, and that means that, and there's a lot of people that have trauma that are directly correct connected to religion, so that makes it even harder, right? Because
Right.
they're, you know, but spirituality, the way that I use it is, when I'm talking to somebody, is it's the unknown, right?
Right.
And it's having faith in the unknown, and it's knowing that I don't know if the sun's going to come out tomorrow. I don't know if my car's going to start. I don't know if I'm going to open the fridge, the milk's going to be bad, but I'm still going to go open the fridge and see if the milk is there, right? That's my reason to get out of bed. That's my, you know, if I don't have hope, if I don't have some sort of faith in the future, then I might as well just go curl up in a ball and be done.
Mm.
So when we, you know, the one of the analogies that I hear used and that I love is when I go to, you know, I'm getting in my car and I'm going to Toronto, I can't see Toronto. I don't know if Toronto's going to be there when I get there, right? Like I don't, right? But I still get in the car and I go there because, you know, I'm assuming it's going to be there, right? Or, you know, and if it's at night, you know, I can only see as far as my headlights. Well, that's all I can see. It's just that right in front of me. I don't know what's going to be up the road or if the road's going to be there or whatever, but I still go and I don't even think about it. And that's what kind of the faith is. That's the idea of saying, I don't know what's going to be there, but I'm still going to do it, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's the component to recovery that is sometimes overlooked, right? Not in the 12 step. The 12 step, they talk about it and they're on it and they're saying this is what it's about. It's about that
Mm-hmm.
understanding. But if I don't have that idea that tomorrow's going to be here or tomorrow's going to be better, or I'm going to be able to work through this, or I'm going to have the courage and the strength to face the idea that I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, then I'm never going to face it, right? So when a
Mm-hmm.
soldier in World War II runs into battle and he saves a bunch of the other soldiers and he pulls them out, right? They ask him, why did you do it? And he goes like, I don't know. I just did it because I felt like I had to. And I believed that it was going to work out. And that's what I did, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I would have thought that I would have got shot, I never would have went in, right? But I go
Right.
in because I know that there's a faith and an understanding that things are going to work out regardless. And there's a
Mm-hmm.
part of that in recovery, when you are so focused on just getting through the next 5 minutes because you're in withdrawal or you're in crisis or you're not coping, if you don't think it's going to work out and you're not going to have something to look forward in the future, you might as well just go pick up your drug and use, right? So this is
Mm-hmm.
where goal setting comes in from a clinical perspective, right? So
Mm-hmm.
looking at how are we going to set goals? What are you looking forward to? What are your hobbies and interests? What are your passions? What are the things that are getting you out of bed? How can we make sure that you have something to look forward to, right? How are you finding connection in your family? How are you looking at, you know, relationships and something to look forward to and how those are going to get better and how those are going to grow? And there's a spiritual component to all of that.
Right. No, and I thank you. This was great. And so faith and hope, and I love that, believing that there is a tomorrow and that you have something to live forward to and look forward to and that you will make it.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you. And then also there's I wanted to point out you said when you recognize that the pain and the fear of change is not as great as the pain and the fear that you're dealing with in the substance use or the addiction. And that's another point of wanting to change.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I love that.
So
Mm-hmm,
so
mm-hmm,
that's where I believe we can't make people change. And I want to be very clear that we can't
mm-hmm,
force them to change, but that's where planting seeds is invaluable. It's more important than anything in the whole world. When you plant a seed to tell somebody that there's something better on the other side, there's a way out. I'm over here when you're ready, right? You can do it, and people with lived experience share that and see that. Those are the turning points for a lot of people because they're so afraid of change. But then when they see change as possible, it's not as scary and it makes it easier for them to make that tilt. We can't force them into it. You can't go and push somebody to do something because then that just increases their fear, right? I'm not going to help you overcome your fear of swimming by pushing you in the pool. It's not going to happen, right? But if I get in the pool myself and I swim around, then you're going to say, oh, this isn't as scary, and I can see that. So planting those seeds and having those conversations and sharing with people and being, you know, loving and kind and compassionate about the fact that these people are not deviant or bad people. They're sick people. They're dealing with trauma. They're dealing with mental health, and they want to get well. And as soon as we start seeing them as people that need to get well, that scale will start to tip, and people will start having less fear in the change itself.
Mm-hmm. No, I love it. And so, you mentioned you have is it a counseling service that you have?
Yeah, I do my own. I have my own private practice where I do one-on-one counseling for people in early stages of recovery.
Okay. And so it sounds like you're coming from a holistic perspective, biological, psychological, socially,
Yeah.
spiritual. Is there other programs because I'm guessing it's a private practice. People may need to pay, or can they go through their EAP, their employee assistance program? How would is there other programs in case they can't afford something like yours?
So there's lots of programs out there. I encourage people to use, I don't know if we can throw it in the chat, Connex, Connex, Connex Ontario.
Mm-hmm.
And Connex Ontario is a drug and alcohol treatment phone for all of Ontario, and you can call that number. That's in Ontario. Of course, Voice to Men's got a greater grasp than that. I encourage Googling it, but in Ontario, you can do that, and there'll be a list of service providers in the area. And all are going to be different, and they're all going to be different to your needs. So my holistic approach and one-on-one doesn't work for some people.
Mm-hmm.
Some people want residential care. Some people want withdrawal management. Some people want opioid antagonist therapy. Whatever it is that they need. But you can find it there, and then those are the gateways that are going to help you find your way in further into care. Of course, the 12-step process. CONNEX.
Mm-hmm.
I just saw the link pop up. CONNEX, or you can Google Connex Ontario.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, there are lots of services out there. The thing is, I just encourage people to just ask, right? Like I do free consultations, and a lot of them don't turn into clients, and nor do I want them to. But I can just sit and have a conversation with somebody and say, here's the direction you want to go. Here's maybe some things you can try. But having that open door is invaluable. When it comes to care, most major municipalities have some sort of addiction services or some sort of affiliation with CAMH or CMHA. Here in London, we have addiction, in surrounding area, we have addiction services of Thames Valley, which is a wonderful facility, plus all the harm reduction, residential treatments, and then the 12-step. Yeah, that's good. Thanks. That's a good one. Okay. And then, of course, the 12-step process. When in doubt, there are AA, NA, CA. I think there's a Chalk Eaters Anonymous. There's an anonymous for everything. You Google it, you find it. You can type your name in there, and somebody from a 12-step fellowship will contact you. They'll call you directly and say, "Hey, you want to go to a meeting? I'll get you out and go talk." But whatever it is you got to do to get your foot in the door when you're at that turning point we're talking about, don't neglect it. It's difficult to ask for help, but that's the time to do it. Jump on it. Take advantage of it.
Awesome. Thank you. I do believe you pointed out quite a few different resources and places people can turn to. Yep. Is there anything else you would like to share with us today? Because I know I've asked you quite a bit, but is there anything that you feel like, you know what, Tolu, I wish you had covered this. I wish we had talked on this. So this is your chance.
I got one thing, Tolu.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's to anybody who's listening that has a substance use disorder or dealing with addiction. Be gentle on yourself. Take it easy. When you're having trouble coping and dealing with emotions, don't be hard on yourself, because being hard on yourself is only giving you more of those emotions that are not helping you get better, right? And you got to figure out how to be kind and if you were to help somebody who was struggling, how would you talk to them, right? And if you were talking to somebody else, I'm pretty certain most people that I deal with substance use or addiction issues, they're really kind and they're really compassionate to other people, but not to themselves, right? Talk to yourself the way you would talk to a young child, or you talk to somebody in need, and look at how you're, treating yourself, and be gentle and try to attach yourself to some of those more positive emotions and emotions of hope that you can latch onto, that you have, the ability to create yourself, and then reach out to somebody.
Thank you so much, Dean. And that's also, I love that. Be gentle to yourself, be compassionate towards yourself, be patient with yourself, and just have hope and faith, and you can, you can seek help. There is help available. It's not all hope is gone. So
Yeah.
thank you so much for taking your
Thank
time with
you.
us today. We really appreciate it.
I appreciate you having me. Thank you very much. I enjoy talking about these things, and you did a wonderful job of poking my brain.
Oh, thank you. And you know what? I could tell you really enjoyed it because you were very passionate, very alive, and I really enjoyed listening to you talking about it. So I can only imagine how good you are at what you do in therapy. Like, you're very passionate about it. You want people to recover, and I can see that. And we need more people like you out there doing this work. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thanks. So, Sivam, do we have any questions for Dean? I know things were popping up as we were talking. Is there anything for Dean that we may get him to answer before we let him go?
No, they don't have questions. So.
Okay, I know we had a lot of statements. People are agreeing, people appreciating this. So, thank you so much, Dean, for your time once again. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And thank you also for being vulnerable with us. Appreciate that too.
That's where it starts. We all have
Yeah.
to be. We all have to be that way. We all have to get to a point of being exposing ourselves so that we can heal.
Yeah. Well, and I think and I'm sorry, I'm like, you're like, I want to go, but I just really believe that you gave people hope. Like, you went, like you said, I know you didn't tell us your whole story, but people can watch your the Open Up show. But you started from a place of addictions, pain, hurt, and you recovered, and then you've done something with it, and you're helping people. So it's amazing when we hear this. And I really hope it is giving people hope that are out there. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay, so before we round up today, I just want to say that we have been working, Voice of Men 360 has been working hard to collect donations for the Indigenous communities in Canada. We started collecting donations a while ago. As we know that there's been a lot that's come out in the news about what's happened with people from the Indigenous communities from back in the 60s coups to back to when, people came to Canada and tried to take over, and just how the Indigenous community has been treated. And as Voice of Men 360 is a fairly new organization, but this is something we're very passionate about. We do have an Indigenous arm of Voice of Men 360, and we've been working closely with them. And so we've come up with a donation drive for the Indigenous families in our surrounding communities. So if you do have used clothes, dry food items, please let us know. We will collect them. You can call us at 416-356-7414. 437-889-8329. I'll just repeat those numbers again: 416-356-7414 or 437-889-8329. And we can be also reached at info@voiceofmen360.org. That's info@voiceofmen360.org, sorry. Or you can contact us through Facebook Messenger and let us know that you have some donations, and we will coordinate with you. So on another note, we will be hosting our first meet and greet. So Voice of Men 360 will be hosting our first meet and greet. That will be taking place on Saturday, August 28th from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. at Earl Bales Park. That's 4169 Bathurst Street North. So that's in North York, by the way. So Earl Bales Park, August 28th from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. And that is 4169 Bathurst Street North. So it is Bathurst Street. It's in North York, I'm sorry. And it's nearby Bathurst Street and Shepherd Avenue West. Okay, so I hope to see you there. I will be there with my family. Looking forward to meeting some other people. And then I also want to announce a few more things. We do have a few live shows that we do on a weekly or monthly basis, or bi-monthly. We do Open Up, which is where you share your personal life journey. I mentioned that Dean was on Open Up not too long ago. So it's a live talk show that takes place every Wednesday at 6 p.m. and Sunday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We have Vili, which is a Tamil live talk show, and it's on Sundays at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We have our monthly webinar, which is what we're doing today, and takes place the first Saturday of every month at 10:30 Eastern Standard Time, where we bring expertise or people from organizations to discuss a particular topic each time, like we did today, mental health and addictions. And then we also have a monthly special show, The Unspoken Tears, which takes place on the second Saturday of every month from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. The focus is on domestic violence against men, bullying, male sexual abuse, traumas, and human trafficking. Okay. And then we also have a South Asian Men's Show, which is the third Sunday of every month from 11:30 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So the Voice of Men 360 and All Bengal Men's Forum will be hosting this show. We will specifically focus on the issues that are faced by South Asian men and create awareness. And then also each month, different countries from South Asia will be participating. And we do have podcasts available of all our shows. They're available on 6 platforms, including iPhone, Google Play, and so on. And then also we have our monthly men's group meeting, which is for men only by men. Okay, so that's the third Tuesday of every month from 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. through Zoom. The next one will be on Tuesday, August 17th from 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. So please join through Zoom. The link is available on our Facebook page and group. And we also have Pass the Talking Stick. So it's an Indigenous peer-to-peer support group that takes place on the fourth Friday of every month from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. through Zoom. The next one will be on Friday, August 27th at 6 p.m. So please join us through Zoom. And the link is available on our Facebook page and group. So information on how to register for any of these upcoming programs or events can be found on our Facebook page, Voice of Men 360. So please register and invite your friends to join us. We're always looking for new members and volunteers to join us at Voice of Men 360. There are no limitations with gender, age, nationality, or ethnic groups. All walks of life can participate in any of our shows. If you want to be a guest on any of our shows or you're willing to be part of our organization, help us directly or indirectly, please reach out to us. We would love to work with individuals, professionals, experts, community organizations, associations, corporations, government officials, and businesses. And our phone number is 437-889-8329. Our email address is info@voiceofmen360.org. Our website is www.voiceofmen360.org. And you can find us on all social media platforms. So we're on Facebook. Please like and join our group. And then we're on Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok. And you can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. So please do so. We would love to reach as many people as possible. Thank you very much for joining us today on our monthly webinar. And I hope to see you next month. Until next time. Bye.